10 years into the future, within the Grand Eastern Federation Kingdom, the world stands on the brink of ruin. The five great sins, beings of overwhelming might, are destined to unleash a catastrophic explosion that will erase the kingdom from existence. In a desperate attempt to stop that grim fate, one man forms a daring plan to nurture these future villains while they're still children. But what began as a calculated mission quickly spirals into something far beyond his control. Inside a lavish mansion, pages of a book turn as a young noble sits comfortably, revealing his past life as an exhausted corporate worker who once slaved away for 78 hours a week. Now, he's reincarnated into luxury, born into a wealthy family, yet powerless and clueless, even holding the book upside down. A butler interrupts his confusion to announce dinner, and after a satisfying meal, a maid shyly offers to help him bathe. Though startled at first, he sinks into the warmth of the bath, realizing he's now living the dream of a pampered noble, unaware of where exactly he's landed. The maid casually mentions that the other young masters will return tomorrow, naming Leo Antonio Palacio. That name freezes him in place. The instant the family name leaves her lips, dread coils in his gut. The Palacio family, he knows it all too well. In a moment of panic, he dunks his head underwater, startling the maid as the horrifying truth hits him. He's inside Psychedelia, the game he once obsessed over, where he spent countless nights grinding levels and exploring every story path. A game where the five great sins always appear, annihilating everything: the kingdom, the nobles, the cities. And the first to fall was always the Palacio family. Leo Palacio, the well-known king of prostitutes, Antonio Palacio, the king of drugs, their fates are sealed. Now, he's their brother, Alan Palacio, a minor weak-ass villain doomed to die early. Falling onto his bed, he curses his luck, crying that he'd rather work overtime forever than die within 10 years. Unlike other chosen protagonists gifted with powers, he has none. But one truth comforts him: he knows the future. And with that knowledge, maybe he can change it. His plan is simple yet insane: to reform the five great sins before they ever become monsters. 2 months later, Alan has already rescued a group of orphans from a human experimentation facility. Among them is a mysterious girl named Udia, now under his care, while his loyal knight Evan stands by his side. Alan praises him for his performance, though his stiff smile betrays his awkwardness. His mind inhabits this body, but his expressions still don't match. Evan notices the change but lets it slide, impressed by his master's resolve. When questioned about Utia's absence from the mansion, Alan insists she remain elsewhere. In truth, it's all part of his strategy. That girl, Utia Bludia, is destined to become Wrath, one of the five great sins who will one day slaughter countless lives. In the original game, she had made a contract with an otherworldly being for power, sealing her fate. But Alan believes giving her a peaceful childhood might stop her descent into darkness. To buy time, he sends funds and a letter to the orphanage. The knight assumes it's a simple note of comfort, unaware that the message carries a sacred quote once used in the game to soothe Wrath's madness. In the game, that attempt had failed miserably, leading to destruction. But here, Alan clings to hope. Even if it's a foolish gamble, he'll try to change what's written. Watching the horizon from his window, he knows he's playing with fate. But maybe, just maybe, this time the story will end differently. Far away from the mansion, Utia receives the letter that would quietly shift the course of fate. When Evan arrives to deliver it, he's immediately struck by the eerie presence radiating from the small girl. There's something unnatural about her calmness, something far too powerful for a child. As she reads the letter in silence, her eyes darken, and a violent wave of mana explodes from her tiny frame. The air grows heavy enough to crush bone. In that instant, Evan realizes she's no ordinary orphan. Her power rivals those of the Master Realm. Trembling, he repeats Alan's words exactly as instructed, saying the time simply isn't right. The moment she hears that phrase, all the fury drains from her. The letter's hidden meaning, a secret code lifted straight from the game, reaches her heart. Holding it to her chest, Utia believes it to be a personal promise from her master, one that binds them in unspoken trust. Evan can barely believe the transformation. The realization hits him: this girl is none other than the future Blood Queen, the embodiment of Wrath herself. Back at the mansion, Alan finally allows himself to breathe easy, content that his gamble bought him more time. The moon outside his window almost seems to shine in approval, as if mocking yet encouraging his ridiculous mission. Days later, he's buried in books inside the library, chasing faint clues about what comes next, when Evan bursts in to report that the second child has been rescued. Alan asks if the boy was handled carefully, and the knight confirms it. During the raid, Evan had seen someone sprint through the shadows with impossible speed, someone inhuman. Before he can describe more, the library door creaks open and a tall figure steps inside. It's Tonio Palacio, the family's infamous second shit of son. He sneers at Alan, mocking him for reading when he can barely make sense of words. Then, Gripping his collar, he throws a punch that sends Alan sprawling. Remembering how the original Alan used to react, the young master forces himself to bow, muttering submission instead of resistance. Tonio laughs cruelly and kicks him again, asserting dominance. Before another blow can land, a dagger whistles past, embedding itself into the wall beside Tonio's face. The room freezes. A cold, commanding voice cuts through the air, warning the brothers to shut up. Standing there is Leo Palacio, the eldest shit, his very presence drenched in authority and disdain. He glares at Tonio, calling him a stinking fool who should stop pretending to be important. Alan watches silently, knowing exactly who these two are. The infamous kings of prostitution, Leo, the ruler of the underground brothels, and Tonio, the mastermind of the drug empire, the king of drugs. Both are competing for the Palacio throne, each more dangerous than the other. Wanting no part in their twisted rivalry, Alan quietly slips away, dragging his tired body out of the room. Later, collapsed on a sofa, the MC listens as Evan reports the second child's safe arrival at the orphanage. Alan nods weakly, knowing this boy is anything but ordinary. In truth, calling him human is generous. The rescued child is Deus Macalian, the second major boss in the game, the future sin of sloth. Born in the central kingdom of Kalian, he had been sold into slavery, passed from one cruel master to another until suffering shattered his spirit and turned him into a weapon of pure destruction. In the original story, he would one day wipe entire nations from existence. Yet, despite being named Sloth, Deus was once diligent and kind, a contradiction that makes Alan see hope. Just like before, he chooses not to bring the child home, claiming the time isn't right. In his letter to Utia, he'd slipped in a small favor, asking her to watch over a new, sickly boy. Now, in the orphanage courtyard, that scene unfolds. Deus sits alone, ignored by the other children, when Utia appears. Her eyes pierce through him like blades as she observes the broken boy. The scars on his hands tell her everything, the mark of the black goat ritual. She recognizes the curse, yet instead of pity, she offers him something darker. She tells him the great moon has chosen him, that his suffering was a test. Her tone carries the weight of madness and divinity intertwined. She extends her hand with a wicked smile, telling him that if he swears loyalty to her master, he'll gain the strength to crush everyone who ever wronged him. In that eerie silence, Utia seals the beginning of another fateful bond. When she finishes, she folds Alan's letter, scribbles her first reply, and adds a soft, almost innocent greeting for her beloved master, an unsettling reminder that beneath her calm devotion lies the birth of wrath itself. At the grand Palacio mansion, where decadence and corruption were the family's daily bread, Alan was finally savoring a quiet afternoon when Evan came crashing in, pale-faced and panicked. The night was so shaken that he nearly called the second master a piece of trash right in front of his lord. Confused, Alan blinked and asked what kind of nonsense had happened this time. Then came the blow. Tonio, the second son, had been found dead on the marble floor of the mansion. The scene cut to his funeral, a pitiful gathering attended by few who actually cared. Count Palacio stood between two women who looked more interested in the decor than their son's coffin. Alan stared at the somber ceremony, quietly acknowledging that his family felt ripped straight from a grimdark fantasy novel. The official story said Tonio had fallen by accident, but that didn't sit right. In the game's version of events, Leo was supposed to eliminate him years later for control of the family, and there he was now, Leo Palacio, standing over the coffin with that smug grin carved into his face. Alan didn't need evidence. His instincts told him everything, but in truth, he couldn't care less about the mansion's power games. His real war was with fate itself, the five sins. Time marched on, and a year of eerie calm settled over the estate. Alan and Evan spent their days in peace, sipping tea like two men who'd survived a storm. His correspondence with Utia had grown frequent, and her latest letters painted a picture of progress. The children at the orphanage were healthy, happy, and growing under her care. She even included a new list of donors supporting the place, which surprised Alan with how quickly it was expanding. Evan pointed out that their network was thriving, and Alan smiled faintly, saying it was good news indeed. Then came something far more important. The Information Guild had finally found a lead on the third target. Relief washed over him. At last, they were close to locating another of the future bosses. But before the night could end in peace, chaos struck elsewhere. In one of Leo's massive distribution centers, the workers were joking about what a generous boss he was when a man suddenly lost control of his body and began slaughtering his own comrades. Screams tore through the air as one by one, men turned on each other in a frenzy of blood and madness. Standing on a rooftop nearby, a small figure watched the carnage unfold with chilling detachment. It was little Deus, the boy Alan had saved. Beside him stood Utia, her crimson eyes reflecting the inferno below. She asked why he was doing this, but the boy ignored her, eyes locked on the chaos he'd unleashed. He simply said this was preparation, cleansing the ground for their master's return. The girl nodded, saying that the place should be made pure for Lord Alan. Together, they summoned a wave of raw mana so powerful it scorched the sky. Moments later, a massive explosion consumed the entire district. When the dust cleared, the mark of the blue moon burned deep into the earth, their declaration of loyalty to their master. 2 more years drifted by. Alan sat once again beneath the gentle sun, savoring the quiet hum of normalcy. Evan approached, out of breath, reporting that the final child, the 5th and last of the sins, had safely arrived at the orphanage. Relief flooded Alan's chest. The others had already been secured, one by one. For the first time, his insane plan seemed complete. He handed Evan a slice of cake, congratulating him on a job well done. The knight devoured it happily, asking why his master didn't look more excited. Alan insisted he was smiling, though his blank, emotionless face said otherwise. Stretching out on the grass, he let himself finally exhale, convinced that everything had gone smoother than he'd ever imagined. Images flashed in his mind, the tragic stories of each boss, the pain that had twisted them into monsters. Saving them before that breaking point had been nearly impossible, yet somehow he'd managed it. When Evan handed over the latest letter from Utia, Alan read it with quiet satisfaction. She wrote that the children were growing strong, that the orphanage thrived, and that he need not worry. Pride bloomed in his chest. Maybe this time, history could truly change. Evan's curiosity, however, broke the moment. He asked when Alan planned to actually meet the children. Alan looked away, muttering that, maybe in 5 years. The truth was simpler. He was terrified. He'd seen what these beings became, what horrors they carried within. He wasn't ready to face that. Not yet. He needed power first. Fortunately, magic came naturally to him now, something he'd been quietly refining. That's when Evan mentioned a name that made Alan pause: the Blue Moon, a mysterious group said to be eradicating criminal syndicates, even noble families. Alan brushed it off as irrelevant, convinced they'd fade soon enough, but Evan's tone turned grim, saying the group had already taken down several aristocrats. A flicker of unease crossed Alan's mind. Before dismissing him, he ordered Evan to sleep in the room next door just in case. The moonlight outside bathed the Palacio estate in pale blue, and though Alan tried to sleep, a chill crept through his thoughts. Somewhere out there, the children he'd saved were growing stronger, their power swelling like a tide he might never control. At the Blue Moon's base, hidden within the orphanage, the children gathered for their weekly briefing, each one representing a deadly sin now reborn with purpose. Utia led the meeting with her usual calm authority, asking for reports on the northern sector. Seal Rang, the sin of pride, spoke first, confidently announcing that she had wiped out the slave traders without anyone discovering her identity. Then came Rin, the sin of greed, who said the disposal of the bodies had been handled perfectly. Radan, the sin of mysophobia, confirmed the southern sector was cleared, and the illegal laboratories destroyed. Everything was unfolding exactly as Utia had hoped, all in the name of their master's will. With unified conviction, they declared themselves the Blue Moon, worshippers of the great moon who existed to serve its glory. But the calm didn't last long. Something unexpected surfaced, and Utia's composure wavered for the first time. Deus explained that during the southern cleanup, they found a document implicating Leo, the eldest son of Count Palacio. It suggested he was plotting to harm their master. The revelation lit a fire in Utia's eyes. The thought of anyone daring to threaten the one she cherished filled her with rage. The rest of the Blue Moon instantly stood at attention, awaiting her command. The air grew heavy with tension as they prepared to strike back. The document's final words were clear: after Count dies, slowly poison him to kill him. Utia crushed the paper in her fist, her fury burning through her calm demeanor, and ordered immediate retaliation. 2 years passed. Count Palacio was dead, and his funeral was as lifeless as the man himself. The official cause was cardiac arrest, though few were surprised. During the service, whispers spread of yet another Blue Moon strike, a nighttime ambush that wiped out an entire gang. The attack had shaken both nobles and authorities, forcing them to finally acknowledge the group's terrifying presence. When the funeral ended, the hall emptied in silence, leaving behind nothing but hollow ceremony. Afterward, Alan and his knight Evan returned to the mansion. Evan asked what his master planned to do now that the Count was gone, but Alan simply began packing, telling his knight to do the same. They were leaving immediately. Evan, shocked, wondered if they were abandoning their home for good. Alan clarified that they were only relocating to the southern region of their territory, the small, quiet village of Rodmill. Realization hit Evan, and the two soon departed in a grand carriage toward their new residence. From the balcony, Leo watched their departure with a crooked smirk, convinced he had finally cleared away the last of his obstacles, both his brother and his father. Down in Rodmill, life started slow and peaceful. Alan adjusted quickly, preparing breakfast with the grace of someone who had long left chaos behind. 3 days later, things were still calm, until news dragged him back to the mansion for another funeral. This time, it was Leo's. Standing before the coffin, Alan couldn't believe what he was seeing. His brother was dead, a blade through the heart. The guards avoided eye contact, trembling like they'd seen a ghost. One even apologized for looking at him before being pulled away by another in panic. Evan approached quietly, his face dark with suspicion. He asked if Alan had anything to do with it, but the silence that followed said enough. The scene then flashed back to the day they left for Rodmill. Evan had questioned why his master chose a small, unknown village instead of a grand city. Alan's expression had darkened as he said Rodmill was the final piece of his plan. He had saved all 5 sins from their tragic fates and prevented the apocalypse they would have brought. Thanks to his interference, they now lived normal lives, free from their curses. The village was never part of the original story, but it had a quiet family estate, the perfect place for him to live in peace. But Evan knew better. He'd seen that same blank face enough times to know when Alan was hiding something. The young master brushed off his questions, but his knight remained unconvinced. Back at the mansion, Leo had watched their carriage vanish into the distance. For a brief moment, he'd wondered if he should eliminate his brother entirely. He'd even considered poisoning him after their father's death but decided against it, thinking the boy too harmless to matter. Still, Alan's presence irritated him, as did the rising trouble caused by Avalon. Leo had summoned his most loyal subordinate, Almon, ordering him to follow the carriage and report every move. When Almon asked if the command meant to eliminate the young master, Leo turned, irritated by the question. He couldn't understand why his right-hand man would hesitate, but before he could snap again, Almon struck without warning, a clean, brutal attack. Leo's eyes widened in disbelief as the betrayal sank in. The truth revealed itself with a chilling calm. Almon was not who he seemed. He was Hidan, a hidden agent of the Blue Moon, loyal to the Red Moon's creed. Their doctrine was clear. The Blue Moon is the sword, and any who threaten the Great Moon will face annihilation. With a swift motion, Hidan delivered the final strike. Leo's body crumpled lifelessly, the weight of arrogance fading from his smirk forever. Hidan had waited 2 years for this moment, for the words that justified his kill. As Leo's blood stained the floor, Hidan simply stated that Avalon was finished, that the mercy of the Great Moon had been wasted. Watching the moonlight from the rooftop, he turned and disappeared into the night. The sun rose softly over Rodmill, casting a golden hue across the quiet village. Inside a cozy manor, Alan Palacio woke with a stretch and a lazy grin, greeting the day like it belonged to him. Life here felt almost too perfect. He ate when he wanted, slept when he pleased, and for the first time, lived like a true noble without the weight of politics or chaos. He even half-joked to himself about starting a French toast business, feeling oddly proud of his cooking skills. But that rare moment of peace shattered when Evan burst into the room, breathless and clutching a telegram. Alan snatched it from his hand, reading it once before the toast slipped from his mouth in disbelief. His brother Leo was dead, and he was being summoned back immediately. Just like that, his paradise had lasted only 3 days, before fate dragged him into another storm. Back at the mansion, funeral preparations were already underway. The atmosphere was grim and unnervingly tense. People flinched at the sight of him, whispering under their breath. Alan couldn't understand why everyone seemed so terrified. When Evan finally spoke, his words landed like a punch. He asked, since when his master had become the mastermind behind Avalon. Alan stood speechless, realizing he'd somehow stumbled into a spiral of insane misunderstandings. Evan explained that with Leo's death occurring right after their departure, Alan now had the perfect alibi, which only made him look more suspicious. The timing was so precise, it almost felt orchestrated, and with Avalon dismantled, there was no one left to dispute it. Before he knew it, Alan had unwillingly become the ruler of the entire county, with rumors claiming he commanded a legendary assassin. He was completely overwhelmed, staring at the mess his life had become. Trying to make sense of it, he brought up the Blue Moon, wondering if they could be behind the massacre. But Evan dismissed the theory, explaining that while the Blue Moon never left survivors, they always marked their work with a signature sign. Avalon's deaths, however, were different. The bodies had all been slashed apart by swords in a massacre that reeked of unrestrained carnage. Realization hit him to outsiders. It looked like the work of a swordmaster under his command. Yet, in the original game, the Blue Moon had never even existed, deepening his confusion further. Meanwhile, deep within the Blue Moon's hidden base, Udia gathered her team for a report. She asked if any traces were left behind, and Rina assured her everything had been erased. Seolrong proudly added that her efficiency left no room for error, while the fox-eared girl joked that their biggest challenge had been clearing the mountains of corpses. Deus entered next, his tone cold as he reported Avalon's remaining number, 456. Exactly as predicted. Radon grinned, bragging about slicing every last enemy cleanly in half. Utia listened, nodding in satisfaction. Their mission had been flawless. Avalon, the once mighty organization that dominated Asteria, was reduced to nothing in a single night of slaughter. Within 5 days, it ceased to exist, erased from history. But just as Utia began to close the meeting, Radon stepped forward, saying their work wasn't done. He dropped a document on the table, evidence that several high-ranking nobles were still tied to Avalon's crimes. Even the Duchy of Altia was implicated. Utia fell silent, her calm composure replaced by a cold, sharp fury. She didn't need to speak. Her eyes alone told everyone what came next. The Blue Moon members straightened, readying for another purge. With a sly grin, Radon promised to handle everything quietly. Utia exhaled, relieved that the operation was moving exactly as intended. She asked whether the Information Guild was managing the narrative, and Rinna confirmed that they had attributed the massacre to a mysterious swordmaster, keeping the Blue Moon's name out of it entirely. Utia reminded everyone to remain vigilant. Their master must never discover their actions. She justified their brutality as self-defense, saying their master's own blood had turned against him, forcing them to act first. Her voice hardened as she warned them never to act on their own will. The Blue Moon existed only as the sword of the Great Moon, and a sword had no right to think. They were instruments of his will, nothing more. To fail him would be unforgivable, for their master knew everything, every secret, every move. Deus stood silently, studying Utia's anxious expression. For someone so powerful, she still carried the weight of fear whenever it came to their master. Taking the document from her hand, he gave a small nod, understanding what had to be done next. Everything they were, every mission they undertook, was for him, the Great Moon, the one person they all held above everything else. Back at the mansion, exhaustion clung to the young heir like a curse. Weeks of endless paperwork and family duties had drained every ounce of his willpower. Ever since the funeral, his life had been a blur of signatures, meetings, and responsibilities. The game's original timeline no longer mattered. This was his reality now, and the entire weight of the household had been dumped on his shoulders. When a few vassals arrived with yet another mountain of documents, he nearly lost it. They mistook his frustration for anger and, terrified, began working twice as hard. Somehow, the ridiculous rumor that he was a cold, calculating mastermind had turned into his greatest management tool. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit room, Evan sat by the fire roasting sweet potatoes, quietly amused by how far his master had come. In just 2 years, the young man had reached the second circle of magic, a feat that usually took twice as long, even for naturally gifted mages. When asked about it, he simply admitted he'd been driven by anxiety and the constant need to protect himself. The technique he used demanded extreme precision, yet his magic felt weak and unstable. What frustrated him most was his tiny mana pool, an innate limitation that no amount of training could overcome. For someone who dreamed of mastering magic, that truth stung more than anything. Still, he wasn't out of options. Just as he began to plot his next move, Evan entered with an ornate envelope, an invitation to a formal dance. The young man could hardly comprehend what that even meant until he arrived at the grand ballroom, where nobles laughed and waltzed under golden chandeliers. He stepped in, sharp in tailored attire, while Evan followed close behind. The event was meant for southern Asterian nobility, a perfect opportunity for him to form alliances. But instead, people scattered the moment he appeared. Some avoided eye contact altogether, while one poor noble nearly fainted after accidentally meeting his gaze. The air itself seemed to shrink around him, the crowd parting as though he carried a deadly plague. Despite Evan's attempt to console him, he brushed it off, insisting he didn't care. He knew the Palacio family's reputation; they were considered the Eastern outcasts. Still, he had come prepared. With a calm, rehearsed poise, he grabbed a glass of wine and decided to try the social tricks he'd practiced. Complimenting a nearby lady on the wine's flavor, he smiled faintly, hoping to sound refined. But his smile turned out eerie and forced, scaring the poor woman half to death. She trembled, promising to speak to her father about sending him a few bottles immediately. Whispers rippled through the ballroom, labeling him worse than his brothers, a true monster. He tried convincing himself she was simply shy, though the truth gnawed inside. Evan reported a new list of incoming gifts: horses, fine teas, rare metals, and the same wine. The protagonist felt defeated, realizing his reputation had spiraled beyond repair. The nobles believed he had murdered his brothers, and that made him a name everyone avoided. Stepping outside for fresh air, he wondered where everything had gone wrong. From a corner of the ballroom, a red-haired woman watched him with curious eyes, following his movements as he walked toward the balcony. Out there under the dim moonlight, he silently reflected on his failures when a soft voice broke the silence, asking to speak with him. A woman stepped into view, introducing herself as Loria, third daughter of Duke Altia, a name that instantly raised alarms. The Altia family was notorious in the game, one of the 3 great villainous houses of the north. She seemed desperate, her voice trembling as she begged for his help. Her story was grim. The Duke, once her protector, had fallen gravely ill. As the daughter of a mistress, she had lost her only shield. Now, her legitimate sisters plotted to erase her for good. The realization hit him she wasn't in the game's original timeline because she had already been killed by this point. When she formally requested his aid, he declined instantly. He had no time for someone else's family chaos, nor the strength to fix it. Even if he wanted to, he lacked the power to change her fate. As he turned to leave, he offered a final bit of comfort, telling her that something good might still find her, and that she should seek someone stronger to protect her from her sisters. Unbeknownst to them, two hidden figures observed from above. One murmured that Loria had approached a great moon and debated alerting the Red Moon faction. Another cloaked figure, Rinna, appeared, stopping him, claiming there was no need. According to their intelligence, Loria was not alone and had no connection to Avalon, which made her irrelevant to their mission. Deus agreed, noting it simplified matters since the rest of the Altias would soon be wiped out anyway. From their perch above the glittering ballroom, they fixed their gaze on the young protagonist, determined to sever his access to information and ensure that the truth about the Avalon incident never reached him. Back at the grand ballroom, a strange stillness filled the air, as though an invisible wall separated the young heir from everyone around him. That eerie emptiness lingered until a red-haired woman stepped forward, her presence sharp and alluring. For a brief moment, he felt a flicker of hope that maybe this time, he could actually hold a normal conversation. But the moment he recognized her face from the game, that hope died. She was yet another dangerous figure. Anyone willing to approach him so easily couldn't possibly be an ordinary noble. He greeted her formally, concealing his unease, while she seemed mildly surprised that he already knew her name. With calculated composure, he remarked that her reputation spoke for itself, and the woman smiled, clearly pleased by the acknowledgement. The narration shifted, pulling back the curtain on Asteria's darkest circles. In the north stood the infamous House Altea, shrouded in secrets and black magic. To the east lay the fractured House Palacio, his own bloodline, notorious for its dysfunction and cold politics. And in the west, House Zenonia ruled the criminal underworld with a blend of charm and cruelty. The woman before him, Kalia Zenonia, was the eldest daughter of that house, a figure both feared and revered, someone who ran her family's syndicate with ruthless grace. The realization hit him like a chill. He had only wanted to form harmless alliances, not stumble into another den of villains. Trying to keep his composure, he offered a compliment about her beauty to diffuse the tension. To his dismay, she accepted it with graceful ease, completely unbothered. Then, with a subtle tilt of her head, Kalia invited him to a private discussion. Inside, the young man spiraled into panic, keeping his face neutral as he politely declined, blaming the prying eyes around them and his need for quiet. Her smirk deepened, saying he was every bit the mysterious man the rumors described. She bid him farewell, her eyes glinting with curiosity as she disappeared into the crowd, leaving him with an uneasy feeling that their paths would cross again. High above the ballroom, the cloaked observers kept watch. They whispered among themselves that the Avalon incident had been successfully contained, but Kalia's sudden interest in the young heir posed a new concern. They agreed to keep a close eye on her and eliminate her if she threatened their master's plans. Days later, the scene shifted to a desolate canyon bathed in pale sunlight. The young man and his knight stood before the mouth of a colossal structure carved into the earth, the Southern Labyrinth. Evan's voice carried quiet worry as he asked if his master was certain about this, but there was a spark in the heir's eyes, the first genuine excitement he'd shown in weeks. He declared that this was the real deal, the legendary Labyrinth of Whispers. Hidden deep in the south, it was a secret dungeon filled with 8 puzzle chambers, and conquering them promised a priceless relic as a reward. He remembered every step, every solution from the game, and now he was finally living it for real. The glowing runes at the labyrinth's entrance shimmered like living light. Seeing them in person sent a chill down his spine. It felt far more real than the digital world he once knew. When Evan asked how he knew of such places, the young man only smirked and said he had his ways. The knight sighed, urging him not to joke with that deadpan face, but before he could finish, a monstrous creature burst through the stone wall. The air trembled as the beast roared, shaking the ground beneath them. The young man immediately recognized the pattern. This was a chamber guardian, one that crushed intruders who failed the puzzle. Without hesitation, he approached the altar, steadying his breath to face the first challenge. Evan watched from behind, silently amazed at how calm his master remained under such pressure. Even after all these years, he couldn't decipher what kind of person his master truly was, or how he seemed to know so much, despite barely leaving the estate. Still, his loyalty was unwavering. Every time he followed the young man's lead, it always ended in success. After a grueling trial, they finally solved the final chamber's puzzle and stepped into the heart of the labyrinth. The treasure room glittered with artifacts and gold, but the young man's attention locked onto a plain black ring resting on a pedestal. He instructed Evan to take only the ring and leave everything else untouched. The knight questioned why they would ignore such wealth, but his master insisted that the other treasures were nothing but trouble. This ring, the Ring of Restriction, was the true prize, a relic capable of rewriting the world's laws. He assured Evan the return trip would be smooth, though the knight's uneasy glance said otherwise. As they exited the chamber, the ground trembled once more, and an army of ancient stone golems rose from the ruins. Evan prepared to fight, ready to defend his master, but the young man had other plans. Escape came first. Still, he knew ordinary magic wouldn't save them. The golems were immune to standard spells, and his mana reserves were pitiful. With no other option, he activated the ring. A blinding light enveloped him, and a deep, resonant voice filled the chamber, announcing that he had inherited the great will of Niakola. The voice commanded him to declare two restrictions: the core power of the artifact. He instantly recalled this moment from the game. This was the system that allowed him to set new rules for magic itself. The ring demanded limitations, in exchange for overwhelming strength. He took a breath and made his first decree, commanding that all magic incantations must require the sacred hand seals of Babylona. The voice asked what he desired in return, and he responded with a single request: the power to alter the world's laws. Then came the second decree. He declared that all magic in the world could only be cast using the sacred words of Babylona. When the voice inquired about his reward, he asked for greater power to defy those same laws. For a moment, silence filled the space, as though even the divine entity hesitated. Then, the voice accepted his terms, praising him for remembering the teachings of the forgotten god and naming him the one who inherited the ancient will. The brilliance around him faded, and Evan's alarmed shout pulled him back to reality as a golem swung a massive arm toward them. The young man didn't flinch. He knew his old, fragile magic wouldn't cut it anymore. But now, with the ring's power burning through his veins, he was ready to see what true magic felt like. Channeling every drop of mana he had, he formed a sphere of lightning that pulsed weakly in his hand. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. He unleashed it toward the advancing army, prepared for the toll that would follow. Because he understood one thing now: power always came with a price, and he was finally ready to pay it.